with all that information when you're done. What to do with all that information when you're done. And so I'll refer back and forth between the two recordings and hopefully remember to repeat this when we do the next video. But just to get you guys started, my background actually is in research science. And so when I go about looking at a topic, I sort of go back and rely on the things that they taught me in grad school. And so this is my SCA art adapted version of that. It's not exactly what I have in grad school, but we're looking at a different level of expertise. So this is sort of the way that I use as a framework to get myself started and maybe approach looking into what they did in the history and the documentation and pulling in the science in a slightly different method. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a screen share here. And so if we've got a topic that we want to look at, let's say cats in medieval manuscripts. Yeah, we'll even go with art for a starting place. One of the simplest things to do is to go through and look at what we've got in Google. What this compares to for the sorts of systems that I'm used to is if we go through and actually, let me do this way. Okay, so when you look at what I was trained in, what you want to do is you want to start with a reliable database or reliable search engine. So if I'm searching a health issue, let's say that what we're looking at is, I wonder if we know anything about disease in felines 15th century. See what we get. All right. So we get a little bit of stuff that comes up. So if I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a literature review, what I'm really looking for myself is I want to see what all do we know, what's out there. It's not just about finding the evidence that proves my point. It's about finding the entire breadth of the evidence. And so I've got a variety of subjects that have come up here. The history of the flea in art and literature. Okay, that's killing me. So this one's actually in Italian. But within this, we've got a whole bunch of things. I've got handy buttons where I can cite, I can save it to my collections. I can do all of those things to keep track of the data. One of the most useful things on this is something where we've got similar articles to be able to go to refer to, so I can continue to start to look and pull more information together and compile it. I've got other terms that I can cross-reference to and related information. So all of those are super useful things. If I go back and switch to my Google search here, so I've got a starting place, right? It's not perfect, but I do have some stuff that comes up. I've got some images that come up and I can do searches on those. I have some questions that other people have asked that give me a starting place. I have something that comes up from My Modern Met. So we've got a source that comes from a museum. That's a reasonable place to start. We've got kind of a general bloggy sort of thing that might be useful. Open culture occasionally has some good stuff associated with it. We'll pull that one up. So we've got a video we can go through and watch. We've got a couple of things here. One of the things that I'm looking for is that PubMed source was going through and giving me other sources that I could go look at and stuff that was related. And we do have some links in here. We have some good quotes. This is a decent piece. It's got some quotes that relate back. They have dates associated with it. The writer Walter Map, I can take that name and I can go ahead and I can search Google for that and see what else that we have about him. Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is kind of one of those gray areas. It's not a great primary source. It's not a great foundational source. You do not want to necessarily build the whole depth of everything you do off this, but You can often find photos with links. It's often good to know what's in Wikipedia because sometimes you'll see this information repeated verbatim on other sites. And then you get to play the game of who said it first and who said it best. But what's really useful to me on stuff like this is going down to the references because it's a good starting place. This is that equivalent to being able to scroll down on that PubMed citation and look and see what sorts of things we have. We've got a reference to an external source. We've got a public domain audiobook related to this person in particular. We've got a bunch of British history online stuff that might be useful. We've actually got a couple of other things. This is one of the things that I think is probably most useful. We've got it here in Italian, but a lot of times when you start getting into these and digging, it'll give you more ancillary information to go through and look and see what other sources are out there. You know, sometimes as you plug information in, you get more info. So if I go back to my cats, we've got a few things coming through. The papal bull is potentially useful. We've got some more stuff that we can look at. Excuse me, other names we can reference. I've got some images here. So this one is actually labeled as coming from the Morgan Library. If you've ever gone through and done a search for something and had stuff come up and, you know, maybe you get Pinterest and you're not sure where it came from, one of the things you can do to get a little more information about that is you can go through and you can search for images with Google. And if I do that, I get a whole bunch of stuff that comes up. And so I get a place where someone has used this in a blog, and sometimes that will lead me to more useful information. I've got an open culture reference that comes up. So that's one way for me to go through and confirm where this came from. As a matter of fact, I think open culture, never mind, we were already in open culture. That loop takes me back. Sometimes that happens too. But you can go through, and occasionally as you go through, keep working on this. Here's an example from the Morgan Library. This is the bestiary in question. I can go through and search and find those specific images. So in about 4 clicks, I've gotten back from a general open sort of reference. I've gotten back to something that's my more primary source to be able to look at. I've been able to come up with quotes, which are translated. A lot of times you can even go from those quotes and track them back. For example, we can go ahead and just highlight this. Let's search Google for that little phrase and see what all comes up. Let me close my images over in Lens. So I've got the open culture that comes up. I've got WordPress. This is potentially the same thing that came up on our image search. Here we actually we're starting to see some words that look fairly academic. Are we let me try this. Oh, maybe, okay. So that's actually downloading as a PDF. And so if we go and we look at the PDF itself, we have a nice referenced source that came up. So now we have additional resources that we can go look through. We've been able to pretty quickly expand our bibliography. And so we've got more sources that we can look at. We are, as we go, what we're basically doing is we are uncovering more and more of the literature. So we can go ahead and take this information and we can use it to find more information and find what's out there. And pretty soon, we're going to be the expert on medieval cats, whether we meant to be or not. But most importantly, this is sort of the rabbit hole version of doing this, which is sometimes the nature of the things that we look at. But what I'm doing in all this, and as I'm going through and I'm following my paths and going back to my original search, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look at all the data that's potentially there and not just get bogged down in this one thing that I think. You know, let's say that my original thought was, well, did they have calicos in the 15th century? I can look for that too and see if I get a little more data in place. All right, clearly this is giving me a lot of modern stuff. I do find as I'm working through these and getting a little more comfortable, you start to get, excuse me, a little bit better feel for, okay, start to get a little bit better feel for some of the resources out there and what some of the period art starts to look at specifically. That I do a lot in the 15th century. So you start to develop an eye for, yes, that's 15th century art, which makes it a little faster as you go through. We do pick up an interesting bit of information that the word calico has been in British usage since the 16th century. So that's something that's potentially useful for us. And that is actually cited to the Oxford History of English. So that's one thing. There are some other useful sources if we're starting to look at words, and I don't currently have it logged into this one, but I'll talk about it in the next video. The Oxford English Dictionary is a great place for, if you're working within the English language, for being able to go through and find the origins of words and where they come from and find references back to their period usage. And sometimes that can lead you down a different bend on that rabbit hole for finding all the information that you want to find. So if we go through, and this one isn't really talking about cats, we do actually have a calico cat reference. Let's look at the history as we scan this one. Not a whole lot that's looking useful there. There's a little bit folklore, maybe not getting a whole lot that's useful. So that may be a question. You know, I'm not turning up a lot of literature that's useful to my question about calico cats in the 15th century. But, you know, I've got the data there. I at least can say, hey, I didn't find literature on that. It's hard to prove a negative, but I can say I looked and I wasn't able to find it. I am, however, able to go back and find all of the things that we've found along here. There was one other thing I wanted to look at. Yeah, so you've got some good art images at the start of this blog. I do like blogs sometimes for being able to go through and find sometimes some interesting images. Ooh, not right now. Interesting images to get us started. So for this one, let me go ahead and do a reverse Google search and see what we turn up. Lots of Redbubble. Sometimes, maybe. Sometimes those will actually give you a reference. That's not so useful. Is that our series? No, that's different kitties. There we go. Do we actually say where it's from? No, but maybe if I search for that, I will turn up a better one. Yeah, nope, we're not getting any useful sources down that rabbit hole. So thus going back to the idea that maybe calico cats is not a useful search term. But we were at least able to quickly go through and identify, you know, what paths are maybe useful and which ones aren't. This is a very general overview from Google and how to be able to go through and look at the literature and what might be useful. There are much more in-depth information in terms of blog posts and things you can find on YouTube where people have absolute mastery in searching Google and being able to find all the bits and pieces. So if you yourself don't have a lot of experience in this and search terms and some of those other things, that's a good place to start. But what I really want people to walk away with an understanding, and really the baseline take-home message for this is, when you're exploring a topic, when you finally decided you're going to go through, you want to look at this topic before you create the thing, you want to know the details, look at it with a broad open mind, follow the rabbit holes, find the information that's out there. Maybe some of it's not useful to you now, squirrel it away. We're going to cover that in the next video. but be able to take all of that information out there, because it starts to build a much broader picture for you on what the usage was of these items in culture, in the culture of the time period, how things came into play, and really will start to bring and tease all the pieces together, and adds depths and color to our medieval study and art and craft and science and whatever your particular geek is. It's going to bring a little more to the table for you, I hope. So with that, I would like to thank my TA for recording, and we can go ahead and stop the recording at this time. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.